So I'm going to be reviewing X-Men Misfits Volume 1. I'm just going to go through these questions really fast. Okay, so the creative team, as you can see here, it's Raina, Telgemeier, and Dave Roman. Raina Telgemeier also did a comic adaptation of The Breakfast Club, and Dave Roman did this really cool comic series called Astronaut Academy, which looked really interesting. And then the art is by Anzu. This is published by Del Rey Books, which you can see their logo, well, Del Rey Manga. Right here, you can see their logo. They are an imprint of Random House Publishing, which I do not know what that means, but yeah. Anyway, it's 192 pages. It's definitely a graphic novel because it was published all at once. It was not published separately. And actually, each of the separate sections is a chapter. Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3. So yeah, so it's definitely a graphic novel, 100%. Act 1 ends on page 12. Act 2 ends on page 163. And then Act 3 ends on page 176, I believe, 177. But yeah, so Act 1 ends 12 pages, Act 2, well, it's all of those pages between 163, and Act 3 is 13 pages. So it definitely fits within the 25, 50, 25 model, where Act 1 and Act 3 are obviously much less than 25% of the comic, but that's okay. That's well within the established parameters. The story, it definitely belongs to Kitty Pryde, main character. The whole comic is from her perspective. Everything it revolves around her goal of trying to fit in. When Professor Lencher shows up, basically at the end of Act 2, the jig is up. She can no longer pretend that she's normal. She now has to go to Professor Xavier's school and try and fit in there, which is made really difficult because she's the only girl at Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. So all of Act 2 ties into, all of the conflict in Act 2 ties into Kitty's goal in trying to fit in and trying to make friends and trying to find her place and figure out what it means to be a mutant. Yeah, so the comic has a very solid arc, has a beginning and middle and end. It all revolves around her trying to fit in, and for a while it seems like she does, except for it becomes clear that where she's fitting in isn't really the right fit for her, I guess. She's trying to become her own person, but by falling in with the Hellfire Club and starting to date Pyro, it becomes clear first to the audience and then to Kitty that she's not really a person to them. She's more of a pet, especially when Pyro starts to get really like possessive of her and her time, and she finds that this isn't where she's supposed to be, and she finally kind of breaks out of that towards the end of Act 2, beginning of Act 3, which is really good. So yeah, but the arc works really well. It's consistent throughout the comic. Kitty's the only one really that has a character arc, though, because, like I said, the whole comic's from her perspective. The whole comic is about her trying to find her place. We don't really see anything from anyone else's point of view. So, while some characters change by the end of the comic, it's really not an arc because you don't really see their motivations. Does the story establish and have effective transitions? Yes, outside of a few exceptions, the entire comic really utilized page turners very well. Like, for instance, at this point in the comic right here, Kitty, here, let me pull this up so I can see. Okay, so Kitty is listening, eavesdropping on these three girls who are talking about how freaky she is or whatever, and then, oh crap, her powers kick in and she falls through the wall. Well, oh shoot, these three girls saw her, what's going to happen next? Well, we turn the page, and it becomes so much worse. She not only falls into these three girls, and they immediately are like, oh my gosh, I told you she's a mutant. Well, oh no, Kitty starts to fall through the floor as well. Now the entire school has seen her. The jig is up. So, yeah, so the comic does these page turners really well constantly. And then they have, good establishing shots. As soon as Kitty appears at Xavier's Academy, look, establishing shot. And everything that happens after that happens here at Xavier's Academy until she moves on to her next location, which is New York. And then ta-da, establishing shot of New York City. So it does a very good job of keeping us in the comic and following Kitty wherever she's going. Okay, so McCloud's, okay, this is the idea of transitions as relates to my chosen work. So I found, this is where I found, I can only assume that this is what you meant by the transitions, but these transitions here in McCloud's book, the scene to scene, the subject to subject, there's one more page of them right here. This page, sorry. Yeah, but, so I found a couple examples, but generally what I found is that the comic mostly mixes scene to scene and subject to subject transitions. A really good example is on this page. So first thing that happens is she walks in, okay, so she walks in and immediately, action to action, we don't see every single step from when she is like, oh, I'm hungry, to when she walks in the kitchen, but we immediately understand that she obviously made this distance. It's not too hard of a leap to make. But here, she looks in, she reacts, oh, who's this? This is subject to subject. It goes from her peeking in through the door, immediately seeing Remy cooking. So even though Kitty isn't technically in this panel, because this is more of a separate reaction shot panel. Manga has weird formatting. But we understand that she clearly saw him. So that's subject to subject. But then, in this page, we go immediately back into action to action. She walks in, he smirks at her, he chops these up, she moves her chair closer as he moves what he's chopped into the bowl. So we clearly, action to action, our brain can put together the sequence of events that's happening here. But yeah, another good example of subject to subject in this comic is right here. It goes from them running, Roro and Rasputin running, oh no, but immediately cuts to Xavier crushed under this. We can immediately understand that this is what they're running to, even though these two are not in this panel at all and Xavier's not in this panel. Subject to subject, we understand the sequence. Anyway, good transitions. Okay, so, okay. Does the story make use of the pages of mini comic idea? Yeah, not often. I mean, it's not like every single page, but a good example is Professor Lencher's class. So in the top here, look, Kitty is introduced to Mr. Lencher as an instructor. She tries to call him Mr. Lencher, but he says, oh no, call me Magneto, his mutant name. Anyway, he teaches, and then by the end of it, oh, that makes total sense. So it's a story. She sees him as an instructor. By the end of it, she's learned her lesson. Moving on. Then it moves straight into a different story that's happening here. Most all of the pages do have that, where she meets someone or interacts with someone, and by the end of it, something has come from that interaction. So generally, this does do the pages of mini comic idea really effectively. Yep, does a story make effective use of a directional flow? Yes, so I didn't have any trouble reading it, even though it's in the manga format, and some pages, as you saw, are definitely not comic standard. I didn't have any trouble reading the story. The pages in the text pulled me through naturally, which is a good job to Michaelis and Carpella's Design, which is the company that did the lettering for the comic. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this to my classmates. But probably only certain ones. So the comic's a lot of fun, but it isn't typically what most people would think of when they think X-Men. The format's really different, as well as the style and characters, so I don't know if a lot of my classmates would like it. It's funny and adorable, but I understand that it's not really for everyone. But I would recommend it to my friends. Fortunately, most of my friends are my classmates, but I could definitely list several that would really enjoy it. If you have an open mind about X-Men comics and you love manga, it's super fun and adorable and really lighthearted. It's basically Ouran High School Host Club version of the X-Men, with Kitty Pryde as the only female at the school. And so there's funny little moments. I mean, several times when Kitty is thinking to herself or really in her brain or really angry, she has these little cat ears and a tail, and it's very chibi, very manga artsy, and it's super adorable. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it to my friends. Um, so one observation that I really wanted to make that we discussed in class, which I definitely can see, I never had it pointed out to me before, but manga definitely does use the whole text or like dialogue that's not actually in a bubble. And so I found actually an example of that. Here on this page, it's kind of hard to get this. Okay, I can't see. Okay, here we go. So Fred is saying this, but it's not actually in the text bubble, even though it's right there, which I thought was really weird and really interesting. Anyway, there's moments like that all throughout the comic. But lastly, the fun fact. Despite the fact that this comic appeared on the New York Times bestseller list for 5 weeks, it still wasn't enough to get a volume 2, which I think is a really interesting lesson in that something can still be really successful, but it's hard to get the rights to the X-Men franchise. That there's so many different things you have to think about that even if what you've created is successful and people really like it might not be enough to guarantee a next book. So you've got to make sure that the story that you tell is strong enough to stand on its own. And I think it is. And even though Volume 2 never came out and I never found out what happened to Professor X or whatever, I was happy with Kitty's resolution in this book. So I really enjoyed it.